Over time, protective instincts kicked in, and I felt a new energy in me. I started to get a sense of how to handle myself and became more resourceful. I began finding food wherever I could. Once, I chopped off a piece of horse meat with an axe from the haunch of a dead German draft horse. It was frozen solid from the cold. Another time, I found an abandoned potato pit. One day, a passing horse was killed by a mine. Within 20 minutes, nothing was left but its mane and guts, as men, like me, quickly cut the meat into pieces. The coachman didn't even have time to react. He just sat in the sled, holding the reins. Another time, we were marching along the road when suddenly a shell overturned a field kitchen ahead of us. Buckwheat porridge spilled out onto the snow. Instantly, without a word, everyone pulled out their spoons, and a feast began. But you can't stop the traffic on the road. A hay cart drove through the porridge, then a truck, but we kept eating and eating as long as there was something left to eat. I collected breadcrumbs and crusts near warehouses and kitchens. In short, I scavenged for food wherever I could. The offensive continued, initially successful. The Germans fled, abandoning their cannons, vehicles, and various supplies, having shot their horses. I became convinced that the stories about their atrocities were not just journalist fabrications. I saw the corpses of burned prisoners with stars carved into their backs. The villages along the retreat route were all destroyed, the inhabitants driven out. Very few of them remained, hungry, ragged, and pitiful. They started taking me to the front line. I remember hellish shellings crawling on my belly through the snow. Blood, blood, blood. During these days, I was wounded for the first time. Though the wound was trivial, just a scratch. It happened like this. At night, exhausted, we approached an abandoned school building. In the empty classrooms, it was warmer than on the snow. There was straw and some soldiers were sleeping. We lay down next to them and immediately fell asleep. Then someone woke up and realized we were sleeping next to Germans. Everyone jumped up, and in the darkness, shooting, scuffing, noise, shouts, groans, and cursing began. People were hitting whoever they could, unable to distinguish anything in the confusion. I received a bayonet thrust in my thigh, stabbed someone with a knife, then everyone scattered in different directions, teeth chattering, everyone feeling hot. Taking off my pants, I determined from the shape of the scar that the bayonet was German, flat. I didn't go to the medical unit. The wound healed on its own in about 2 weeks. At the front line, it was easier to get food. At night, one could crawl out to no man's land, cut off the knapsacks from the dead with a dagger, and in them there were dried bread, sometimes canned food, and sugar. Many engaged in this during moments of calm. Many didn't return, as the German machine gunners were not sleeping. Once, some sergeant, apparently drunk, drove a sleigh into no man's land, where both he and the horse were immediately killed. But in the sleigh, there was food, bread, canned goods, vodka. Immediately, there were volunteers eager to retrieve these valuables. First, 2 men crawled out and was struck down by bullets. Then 3 more. There were no more willing participants. That night, I distinguished myself, realizing that Germans were shooting at even the slightest rustle. I decided not to take anything, but instead cut the harness, tied a telephone cable to the sleigh, and safely returned to the trench. Then we pulled the sleigh in. All the food was riddled with bullets. The vodka had leaked out, but we still gorged ourselves to our heart's content. Near the Mga-Kirche railway, our offensive stalled, and the Germans took up strong positions. Here in the large village of Nahode, of which no trace remains now, I met the new year of 1942. The end of 1941 was marred by a repulsive episode. About 3 days before this, the command of our battalion received orders to move into the German rear through a gap in the defense, and from there to direct artillery fire. In terrible frost, through snowdrifts among virgin forest, we traveled about 20 kilometers on skis. The flares illuminating the front line were left behind. The moon was shining. Huge fir trees stood all around. Finally, in a small clearing, we discovered dugouts that had been dug in the summer. We decided to rest and warm up in them. Dawn broke, and suddenly someone yelled, "Germans!" I was in the farthest dugout and reacted later than everyone else. Emerging into the light of day, I saw no one, and only in the distance in the forest I caught glimpses of the figures of my fleeing comrades. I had no choice but to follow them. Under a fir tree, I was met by a frightened lieutenant with his revolver at the ready. "And the Germans?" "I don't know, I didn't see any." It turned out there had been a panic, everyone had run, and the officers were the first to flee. It would have been fine, but in the rush, they had forgotten the radio in the dugout, and I didn't even know about it. We decided to go back. But now it turned out that the Germans had indeed occupied our positions. A firefight broke out, and we retreated empty-handed. The radio was lost, the order unfulfilled. Before the new year, repressions followed. An investigator arrived, and there were interrogations. A scapegoat was found, the radio operator, a likable sergeant named Fomin. Then a tribunal session was held, a show with a predetermined outcome. However, it turned out to be better than we expected. Fomin and another soldier who had stolen honey from a hostess in Nahode were each sentenced to 10 years in prison, to be served after the end of the war. Pardonosov, that was the name of the honey thief, soon atoned for his guilt. A bullet pierced his lung. Whether he survived, I don't know. Fomin, however, served long and well with us, and apparently later rehabilitated. But on New Year's Eve, everyone felt sick at heart. Returning from the front line, I fell asleep in the warm dugout, slept through midnight, and didn't even hear the gunfire that erupted everywhere at that hour. Soon we left Nahode, the last village I saw until mid-1943. The regiment relocated to a swampy, scrubby forest near Pogosty station. Everyone thought that delay here was temporary, that in 2 or 3 days we would move on. However, fate decided otherwise. We got stuck in these swamps and forests for a whole 2 years, and everything we had experienced so far, those were just the flowers. The berries were yet to come.